The year is 2020. Hana, a 40-year-old woman living in Tokyo, comes across a news article about a woman named Kimiko, someone she hasn't thought about in years. Kimiko, now 60, is on trial for the abuse and illegal confinement of a young woman in her home, and Hana, reading this, feels as if the floor drops right out from under her. This woman belongs to a past that Hana has spent 2 decades trying to forget. And the story takes us back to 1990s Tokyo, where a young Hana struggles with poverty and neglect, forms an unlikely bond with Kimiko and 2 other young women, open up a bar together called Lemon, and slowly drift into dangerous criminal activities. Hey everyone, welcome back to Vera Reads Books. Today I want to share with you a spoiler-free review of the book Sisters in Yellow by Mieko Kawakami. Sisters in Yellow was published in Japan in 2023 and got its English translation in March of this year. Thank goodness for translators. It has been described as Japanese noir, or also as a Japanese Breaking Bad. I am a big fan of Mieko Kawakami's work, so when I learned that Sisters in Yellow had been translated into English, I jumped on it. I got the book without knowing anything about it. I didn't know anything about the story. I didn't know how the book was received. I only knew the title and the fact that it was written by Mieko Kawakami, and that was enough for me to purchase the book. And I'm happy to say that she has done it again, because Sisters in Yellow is an amazing book. One interesting thing I learned about this book after I read it is that this was originally published in parts in a newspaper before it was published as a novel in Japan in 2023. And in an interview, Mieko Kawakami has talked about how she deliberately starts off this book with a newspaper article, with Hana reading about Kimiko in the news and the readers first meeting Kimiko through this kind of like limited form of information before learning more about what actually happened through Hana's memories. And I didn't really notice this when reading the book, but looking back on it afterwards, the fact that it was released in parts had some interesting effects on the writing, which I will talk about more later. And in this video, I want to share with you a spoiler-free overview of the plot, the characters, the writing, the major themes that are explored in the book, the book's strengths and weaknesses, and also some content warnings. So everything you need to know if this is a book that you would want to pick up as well. And at the end of the video, I will also quickly highlight some other amazing books from this author and where I would recommend starting if you haven't read anything from Mieko Kawakami yet. She is one of my favorite authors, so I have some things to say. The story starts in 2020 under the backdrop of COVID, where the streets are becoming emptier and emptier, and Hana comes across a news article about a woman named Kimiko. This takes us to a flashback of the 1990s, where Hana grows up as a teenager in Tokyo. And so the book has 2 timelines, the present timeline in 2020 and also the flashback of Hana's youth, but that takes up the largest part of the book. Hana grows up poor and is basically left to fend for herself. Her father is absent and her mother works in nightlife. She pays hardly any attention to Hana. Basically, all she does for her is leave some money in a can so that Hana can pay the bills and get some groceries if she needs it. But that is basically where her care ends. Her mother often brings friends over to their house that she meets through her work, and one morning Hana wakes up to find a sleeping woman next to her who turns out to be Kimiko. Kimiko is 20 years older than Hana, but she takes an interest in her. They start hanging out, she cooks for her, and Hana finds a closeness with Kimiko that she doesn't experience with her own mother. And eventually together they open up a bar called Lemon. Through this, Hana becomes close with 2 other young women, and eventually the 4 of them start living together and form this sort of pseudo family. In Lemon, in that house, eating together, walking together, Kimiko had taught me how to laugh from my heart. She had made me happy. She had accepted me as I was. Hana finally feels like she's found a place where she belongs and where she can finally learn to provide for herself. There is a sense of freedom and possibility, and Hana trying to build a life for herself outside of the paths that have been available to her before. But what starts out as a story about friendship and sisterhood and freedom and survival gradually becomes much darker. The lines between right and wrong get increasingly blurry, and Hana tries to desperately hold on to what they have built as things start to unravel. And that is all I will say about the plot without getting into spoilers, but yeah, quite a lot happens from here. One of the things I enjoyed most about this book is just watching everything unfolding and gradually coming to understand more about what eventually ended up happening. This book is definitely much more plot heavy than the other books that I have read from Mieko Kawakami, for example, All the Lovers in the Night and Breasts and Eggs, both amazing novels as well. They are much more slice of life, very introspective, very character driven, not that much plot. And this book has all those things as well, but also more plot. There are also quite a few side characters who have very interesting background stories as well, and who have a part to play in Hana's life. And sitting at around 450 pages, it is the longest book of hers, definitely a lot longer than, for example, All the Lovers in the Night. But let's leave this section of the video here and talk more about the characters, because they really are at the heart of this story. Let's start with Hana, the main character of the story, and also the person whose memory you read from, because these are her memories. And she has had a very difficult childhood because her parents were never actively there for her. They never took care of her. And so she has never had a sense of security in her life. Kawakami loves to write from the perspective of an outsider, someone who never really fit in. And Hana is like that too. As a student, Hana also feels quite lonely. There is some bullying because of her poor background, and she only ever had one real friend. And as she starts working part-time after school and starts to make a little bit of money for herself, this is something that she really, really loves. Hana sees money as safety and security, or also in the hands of some more powerful people as power. And so she becomes kind of addicted to this feeling of making money for herself so that she can have some semblance of peace and security in her life. Hana doesn't see money as something that can help her buy material things. That is something that she's not interested in. She just craves that stability and that feeling that she isn't always one disaster away from losing everything. Money gives you time to think, time to sleep, time to get sick, time to wait. Hana wants to be independent and take care of herself, but at the same time she's also still a teenager, and she is still looking for someone, whether that is her mother or Kimiko or anyone else, that she can depend on. And because Hana is still really young, you also as a reader don't really know how reliable she is as a narrator and how reliable these memories are. Hana is definitely a very sympathetic character. It's easy to sympathize with her situation, but she's not always likable. And to me, she felt like a very real person with very real flaws. That also makes sense given her life and her upbringing. Let's also talk about Kimiko, because she is such an interesting character, and even after finishing the book, I still have so many questions about her. I still don't feel like I know her very well, or that I understand her motives or what was going on inside her head. I can make guesses, but I'm not sure if I'm right, and I think, that makes sense because we are reading this book from Hana's memories, and Hana also has these questions about Kimiko. She remains to be somewhat of an enigma. She's very mysterious, but as the book goes on, you will learn more about her life, the things that happened to her in her youth, and some things that shed some light on her behaviors in the book. And Hana sees Kimiko as this almost like bigger than life person who is older, who is experienced, who knows what she's doing. Basically everything her own mother isn't. But when you look at Kimiko's actions rather than Hana's own impression of her, then you don't really know if she actually has as much control as Hana thinks she does. Is Kimiko a bad influence on Hana, or is she just trying to help Hana out in the only way that is available to her? Kawakami doesn't really make that very clear, and it is up to you as a reader to have your own thoughts about that. Then there are two other young women in the group, Momoko and Ran. Momoko actually comes from a wealthier family, but she is basically a runaway, and she joins the group kind of because she doesn't really have anywhere else to go. And Ran works at a hostess bar when Hana first meets her, and she is another young woman who doesn't really have a stable place in the world. Ran is in a complicated relationship with her boyfriend, and her jobs aren't typically going very well. She is much more passive. She doesn't really like confrontation. As the four women start living together, you do really get a sense of that closeness that starts to form between them, but you also still very much are aware of the fact that they are there because they need a place to be and they need a family to belong to. In the middle of the night, when Sanganjaya was sparkling with light here, there, and everywhere, and the five of us were walking down the street after dinner at some 24/7 restaurant, contentment would wash over me and I'd have to stop and put my hands to my chest. This, I thought, must be what they mean by the springtime of youth. Which brings me to one of the major themes of the book, which is home, family, and belonging. These women are all different from the family where they grew up, and they've had a tough upbringing in different kinds of ways. That together they do find that support and that closeness, but it also creates a situation where they kind of become dependent on each other. As someone who really enjoys the found family trope in books, this one I enjoyed really as well, and it was interesting because it is a quite realistic form, I think, of found family, in the sense that yes, it can give someone a place where they belong and a sense of support and community, but it's also maybe not always perfect, and you do still kind of need to deal with the fact that you are still all different people with different needs, and it doesn't always match. But at the same time, you don't really know where else, you can feel like you belong, and it gave the book such a depth that I really enjoyed. Another major theme of the book is money and poverty, how money can buy security, safety, stability, especially for people who grew up without having that financial safety net. And here the book also offers some social commentary, because these are all people who live outside of the margins of society and who oftentimes, for example, don't have a high school diploma, they don't have ID, they don't have a bank account. And because of this, they also have fewer options available to them. For example, if you don't have a high school diploma, then getting like a normal job can be really difficult. Or if you don't have ID or a bank account, you can't really rent an apartment or rent a space to open up your own bar very easily, unless you happen to know someone who is willing to rent it out to you, despite you not having the necessary paperwork. People like this often can end up working in nightlife and, for example, keeping their cash in a shoebox or a coffee can or something, and they don't have the sense of like a safety net other than the small community of people that they build around themselves who are in a similar situation. So this idea that poverty doesn't just mean that you don't have enough money, but also that you don't really have that many options. And the people around Hana also talk to her a lot about money. For example, one quote from one of her employers: "You think you've got nothing to do with some rich person over there with all their money, right? People with money make the rules to help themselves, and poor people get sucked dry. And when you're all dried up, when you're nothing but dregs, they make you think that it was your fault you failed at life." As is often the case with Mieko Kawakami's book, there is a theme of gender and how the political and societal systems can affect women in their day-to-day lives. And this book too shows how women can be even more economically and socially vulnerable, even if they try their best to create a life for themselves. Another big theme in this book is memory, and how we can kind of change the narrative of some things that happened as time goes on. As you're reading the book, Hana is not just reliving her memories, she's also kind of trying to make sense of what happened, and you don't really know how things like guilt can shape our memory and our narrative of what we think happened. And Kawakami doesn't stop there, because there's also a major theme of trauma in this book, and how our upbringing can change how the actions that we make going forward, and possibly even the repetition of certain mistakes, because we just don't really know how to do things differently. And then there's the color yellow. This is something that we haven't talked about before, but yellow plays a really big part in the story. After meeting Kimiko, Hana learns from her about the role that yellow plays in feng shui and how it can bring about financial luck. This is also why they named their bar Lemon, and yellow becomes a really important thing to Hana. And she even creates something in the house called the yellow corner, where she adds all of these like little items that are all yellow to bring about more financial luck for them. A piggy bank, a stuffed animal, a pair of chopsticks, a makeup pouch, a pencil case, envelopes, notepads, stickers, a ball of yarn, a bunch of boxes in all different sizes, a keychain, fake flowers, a spool of ribbon, and even a yellow good luck cat. Every time I added something new to the already crowded shelf, I felt like I made our future just a little bit brighter, like it was bringing us more good luck one step at a time. Let's talk about the writing, because this is one of the things I really admire always about Mieko Kawakami's books. I love her prose. It is very clean and simple, conversational, very direct, but also really kind of like moody and atmospheric and introspective. Some of her main characters are people that you cannot really fully trust their thoughts about stuff as you are reading from their perspective, and something kind of feels slightly off. For example, the main character in All the Lovers in the Night starts to drink a lot, and you become, as a reader, really worried about her because she doesn't really fully seem to understand the danger she's in or the situation that she's putting herself in. And something just feels off, and it is the same with the main character in this book sometimes too. But her writing is also really observant, and she can take any ordinary scene and turn it into almost this like dreamlike sequence. For example, the 4 women sitting around the kotatsu together, drinking beer and watching TV. So you'll be reading this and you see the scene so clearly in your head, and then all of a sudden she will insert this like really emotionally devastating sentence that cuts through your almost dreamlike state and really makes you like, whoa. And sometimes she will describe an event that happened to the main characters. This is also something that she does in all of her books, that were such like an emotionally devastating moment for that character, but because she describes it so simply, you are left as a reader to figure out the emotional gravitas of what happened yourself. And about their writing, with the fact that this was originally published in parts in a newspaper, this was something that I noticed while I was reading the book, but I didn't know why. I just thought that this was good writing, like a good writing trick. But I do think that this wasn't in part shaped by that, because she tends to end chapters with like a hook, which is something that, you know, happens a lot more in writing, but it was really present where she would sometimes insert sentences like, but then we never saw her again, or if only it could have happened that way, to make sure that, you know, people come back at a later installment. And then also there is a bit of repetition sometimes at the beginning of new chapters to kind of let the reader know, like, okay, this is where we left off last time. So now that I know that this was originally published in parts, it does make sense that this is a writing technique that she used. But it doesn't really bother me when I was reading. I actually thought that was nice. And one critique that I did read from other viewers that I personally don't share, I love this book, every page of it, but some people did say that they found the pacing to be a little bit too slow. And yes, it is a slow burn, this book, but yeah, the pacing is a little bit, I will say that the pacing is a little bit wonky sometimes. This next section is called You Will Like This If, and I think the first one is just, if you enjoyed some of her other books, then I think you will like this one too, because it has her writing style and her just way of doing things that is just so good. Even if it is a little bit different than her other books in setup. There are also 2 other books that I thought of that if you read and enjoyed those, then I think that you might like this one too. And the first one is The Secret History by Donna Tartt, which is also an amazing book. And this one is not that similar in some ways, but it did give me sort of a similar reading experience, and it also uses similar story dynamics. For example, the fact that when you start reading the book, you know very early on that something horrible is going to happen. And so you read the book with this inevitability hanging over it, where you don't really, it's not like you're thinking like, oh, what's going to happen, but more so like, how did these people get to that point? It's also about this group of outsiders kind of forming their own little world, which is present in both, and also the fact that the characters are becoming more and more morally complicated as the story goes on. Another book that this one kind of made me think of was Natsuo Kirino's book called Out. If you haven't read Out yet, then this is one that I would definitely recommend looking into if that is something that you typically tend to be interested in, because that is an amazing book also. And this book made me think of it more so like in tone as well as like the crime element. Both books feature women living in difficult economic circumstances, and they also both have this tension between female solidarity and personal survival. Even though Out is definitely a lot more gritty and a lot more violent, and the crime element is bigger there, and there's also some horror there that is not present in Sisters in Yellow, I do think that if you happen to have read Out and you enjoyed it, then this one might also be something that you would like. But overall, I think you will like this if you enjoy character-driven stories that involve complicated people and complicated relationships. If you enjoy books with a found family trope that isn't necessarily very rosy and cozy, but more so a little bit more gritty and realistic. And books that have strong female relationships with a slight sapphic ambiguity, or if you enjoy getting really immersed into the everyday lives of the characters, watching them working and hanging out at home and eating and talking and worrying and arguing. And also, if you, like me, enjoy the kinds of books where there is this like haunting feeling and like the darker elements creeping in more and more. And let's talk about some things that might make you not like this book. And the first is just, as I said, it is kind of a slow burn. It is a bit of a longer book, and the pacing is quite slow because it does focus on those everyday moments. It doesn't move forward very quickly. And so that is something you need to be able to appreciate. If you enjoy crime thriller type books where there is quite a bit of action and things are a bit more fast paced, then this might not appeal to you. Also, the ending, without going into any spoilers, it might leave people feeling a little bit dissatisfied because it doesn't answer every question and it leaves quite a few things open. And I can't really talk about this without spoilers, so I won't, but it just leaves a lot of ambiguity there that I actually, as a reader, really appreciated. But if you are the type of person where you kind of do want the ending to be a somewhat satisfying conclusion to the events of the book, then you might feel a little bit dissatisfied by the ending. I personally really liked that the ending was done this way, and I think it is one of the reasons why this book has stayed with me for so long after I read it, because I have finished a few books since finishing Sisters in Yellow, but I'm still thinking about it because I'm still trying to figure some things out. I'm still trying to figure out how I even feel about certain things. And this book just has staying power, and the atmosphere and the gloominess sort of stays with me too, which is something that I experience more when I read Mieko Kawakami's books. One of the things I really appreciate about her books. Let's also go over some content warnings in case you are curious about that, because while this isn't a very graphic or violent book overall, there are some things to keep in mind. There is some child neglect as well as some domestic and physical abuse. The book doesn't really go that much into detail here. For example, one of the side characters is in an abusive relationship, and there is physical abuse that you will then hear about after the fact. So it doesn't really like show you what is happening while it's happening. You will hear about it later, but it definitely is still present in the story. There are toxic and controlling relationships, and there is some bullying also. Not that much into detail, but it is there. There's lots of drinking and alcohol abuse in this book, and also some just mental health difficulties. There's some mention of sexual relationships in this book, including some that are maybe age inappropriate, or there is some power imbalance. But I don't remember there being any actual sex scenes in the book. I don't think that there are any. Very quickly about Mieko Kawakami's other books. She has in English translation 3 other novels and 1 short story. One of her other novels is called All the Lovers in the Night. This is an amazing book that I have read twice. It is about half the length of Sisters in Yellow, and it follows a lonely freelance proofreader living in Tokyo called Fuyuku as she struggles to kind of break out of her shell, meet some new people, do some nice things. And yeah, this is a really beautiful book. Breasts and Eggs follows 3 women, 2 sisters and one of their daughters, who are trying to figure out their role in society, how they think about relationships, how they think about their own bodies. And Natsuko, our main character, is trying to figure out how she can possibly become pregnant and become a mother outside of the typical traditional relationships, which she is not interested in at all. Heaven is another one of her novels. This is about two teenagers who are being bullied and their secret friendship that starts. This is the book that I have not read yet, so I can't really say anything about this other than the fact that I hear great things about it. But because it is about bullying, which is always a little bit of a touchy subject for me, and I hear that it is really brutal at times and it doesn't hold back any punches, I don't know if this is a book that I really want to read. I haven't worked up the courage yet, but I hear good things about it. And then there's the short story called Miss Ice Sandwich about a young boy who becomes fascinated with a woman who works at a supermarket sandwich counter that he nicknames Miss Ice Sandwich because she sells sandwiches and she has a very prominent eyeshadow, the color of ice. And this is a very lovely, heartwarming little book. It is a coming-of-age story. It is about loneliness and the pains of growing up. It is a really, really nice one. If you haven't read anything from Mieko Kawakami yet, I kind of would recommend to just start at the book that I talked about that piques your interest the most, because they're all great. But I do think that Sisters in Yellow would be a good place to start, even if it is a little bit different from her other works. I had an amazing time with this one, so if you enjoyed this review, then I definitely recommend picking it up here, and if you enjoyed it, maybe reading some of her other books too. And that's it. That was my spoiler-free review of Sisters in Yellow. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Is this a book that you might want to pick up as well? Have you read any of her other books? Maybe you even read Sisters in Yellow, and I would love to hear your thoughts about that as well. I have some more in-depth, spoiler-free reviews of some books that I have really enjoyed over the last couple of months already out on the channel, as well as a video where I wrap up all the books that I've read so far this year. I would love it if you could help out the channel, if you're also a book lover and you want to help me out, if you could watch some of them, because I'm trying to get the channel monetized before February 2027, because YouTube is going to change the monetization structure, and if the channel isn't monetized yet by then the criteria to get it monetized are more than going to double. So it's going to take me a lot longer to get the channel monetized if it hasn't happened yet before February next year. Long story short, if you want to help me out, you can do so by watching the videos you haven't seen yet, liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, hyping, anything you can do, I would really appreciate. More book reviews coming up soon. Thank you so much for being here and have a wonderful day. Let me know, because I'm trying out different things. Do you enjoy me inserting a few quotes from the book sprinkled throughout my review to give you a bit of a sense of the writing? I would love to hear in the comments. Is that something you enjoy and would like me to do more from now on?